Well, you can do that afterwards.
That's my lifestyle.
Let me take you right back to the very beginning. How did you get involved in this game? Because everybody, as a kid, everybody draws cars on their school notebooks, and they have this sort of fantasy idea of how cars should look. But you guys, we become world famous for it.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's a dream job, obviously, and you start out as a kid dreaming about drawing cars for a living, actually. Very few times it becomes a reality because it's such a limited profession. There are probably, recognized designers out there. You'd probably say a handful. Of course, every design needs a team behind it, and there are a lot more junior designers underneath. But even to become a junior designer in this day and age is extremely difficult. There are so many talented artists and designers and engineers out there that I think if you aspire to be a car designer, it's pretty much the top of the design profession. In other words, if you could design a car, you're pretty much capable of designing anything. Because if you look at a car, obviously what makes you renowned or stand out is the style of the car, what you've managed to do with the shape of the car. But if you think about that, that's just a part of the design. Also, you have to design the headlights, you have to design the door handles, the instrumentation, the seats, the steering wheel, the headliner. Everything has to have a look to it. Every button you touch has to be designed. So as a car designer, you're not just obviously doing the beauty of the car, you're doing every little fiddly part that you have to see, touch, and move. So if you're doing a car design, you're pretty much an incredible product designer, because like I said, it's a lot of things that have to come together to make the car convincing as a product. The way I got into it is pretty unusual. Although we all do start drawing cars at around 10 years of age, we start getting interested in transportation, in planes, trains, automobiles, and you start dreaming a little bit when you're a 10-year-old about what you would like to drive when you finally get into that age group. And we all turn to supercars, obviously, when we're young because they're the most exciting things. Now I'm not sure the public and the youth are turning more towards electric, so maybe the sound isn't such a critical thing for the youth of today. But when I was growing up, anything that sort of had a vibration or an exciting sound to it or a sensual shape to it turned me on. So what I referred to before about why my history is a little bit different is I grew up in a country where basically cars weren't really the norm. I grew up with camels and horses and donkeys. And
you were born in Morocco, weren't you?
I was born in Casablanca, Morocco, just at the turn of the 59, so that's the turn of the 60s. But at any rate, growing up in Casablanca in the 60s, that was more about, not so much about cars, but basically the necessities of life. You had to get somewhere, you either got in a taxi or a horse-drawn carriage or whatever, but and of course cars were there, but they weren't exciting cars to look at. So I grew up till about the age of 10, not really introduced to the world of automotive technology. That changed slightly when in 1971, when I was 11, we moved to Istanbul, Turkey. And then I spent the next 5-6 years in Istanbul, starting a little bit to get more introduced into sort of a Europeanized culture where cars were more important, although still in Turkey, it's part of Asia, the part where we were living, so there wasn't a heck of a lot to excite you automotively. But in the 60s, my father had started a car dealership in southern Spain. And I remember every summer, instead of having those nice summers off from school when you're a young kid to go and play with your friends and things, I was shipped off to go work in the dealership in the body repair section. So I loved car bodies. I loved getting my hands dirty. I loved the creative side of body work where you could actually change the shape of the cars, you could paint the cars. A lot of interesting paint technologies were being developed. So I was able to become a custom painter and that by a very young age. And I loved that, and that sort of started getting me into the creative side of cars. And obviously when I was 10, I'd grown up basically having my mother need to chuck me out of the house to go out and play, because I'd much rather stay in-house and draw. I was drawing everything when I was a very young kid. I used to draw I do the birthday cards, I do the animals for kids that would ask me to draw me an elephant or a horse, draw flowers. That's what I love doing. I much prefer to draw than go out and play in a sandbox. And eventually, obviously, I started drawing cars because that turned me on. And when I graduated from high school in Madrid, Spain, the last 2 years of my education, high school education, were in Madrid International School. I was destined, or thought, I don't have to go to university, I'm going straight to my father's car dealership to work there when I graduate. Except that in my last year of high school, I met a colleague, a fellow student who was actually racing motorcycles. So I tagged along with him and thought, wow, that's the coolest thing to be able to race a motorcycle. And I asked my father for a year off before I had to begin working for him. So I was 17, and I said, could I try to race motorcycles for a year, see what happens? And he said, sure, go ahead. So I started racing in 250s, and I won the national championship that year for the juniors. So I said, keep going, and I moved up to the senior class, and I won that national championship. And then I got, not headhunted, but asked by Honda to race for their factory team. So I raced 4 years in the World Championships. Really enjoyed it. I mean, that's the age when you're, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, right around that age where kids are looking for something to keep them in good shape and possibly becoming famous or very well renowned for what you're doing. And I thought motorcycle racing was for me. I did pretty well, top 10 for the 4 years I was racing. And when I was 22, my father sat me down and said, this is your last year racing. And it hit me really hard because it was my life. But he said, you're not good enough. And I said, well, I'm top 10 in the world. What's wrong with that? And he says, well, you're not winning. And that's true. I was average, 5th, 7th, 3rd, maybe once. But he said, there's no reason to stay in here unless you're actually a winner and people are looking at you as, potentially winning every race. You're going to be 30 years old, broken bones with no education behind you, nothing else, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So either you're going to get out now and you're going to come work for me, or you're going to go off and study. And I'll support you, because he completely supported me on the racing side. It wasn't like he was trying to, just allow me to race. He was pushing for me to be as good as I could be. But for him, first was the most important, and second was first the losers. And I didn't understand it at the time, but now I do. So he said, if you go off to university, I'll let you study whatever you want, whatever you choose to, but you have to get a job and you have to be the best you can be. So serendipity, I found out that there was a college in Los Angeles, just outside of Los Angeles, that was teaching car design. And so I asked my father, would that be all right? He said, absolutely, but remember, you got to finish and you got to get a job. So I wrote to the university and said, I'd like to start car design with you, and can I start the next semester? And they wrote back, no, it doesn't happen like that. You have to show that you're talented enough to even begin with us, because this university, called Art Center College of Design, the #1 design university in the world for any type of design, be it graphic, fashion, film, environmental design, product design, car design, whatever, that is the university. I didn't know it at the time. And they only allow 1,000 students into the university for all these different subjects. And you have to actually provide a portfolio before you go there that they'll judge and see if you're starting at a high enough level, because they don't want you to learn there. They want to train you to be the best. So I remember the day I arrived at Art Center, the first day of class, there were 30 of us sitting there. And the professor walks in and says, okay, you guys got to be pretty proud of yourself, because you're 30 of an average of 4,000 students who apply. So we take the 30 top students always, the applications. And of course you're inflating yourself with pride at that moment, thinking, I'm hot, I'm really good. But he says, we've never had a class with more than 10 students finish. So 2/3 of you are going to drop out along the 4 years, and obviously everybody's not me. Well, only 6 of us finished. And of those 6 guys that finished, we were immediately picked up, because that's what happens, you're cream of the cream. One guy was Grant Larson, who went to Porsche, designed the first Porsche Boxster. One was Craig Durfee, designed the first Dodge Viper. Third one was Ken Okayama, did the Ferrari Enzo and the Maserati Quattroporte. Fourth one was Miguel Angel Galuzzi, did the first Ducati Monster that saved Ducati. Fifth one was Andrea Zapatinas, who designed the Fiat Barchetta and later became head of design for Alfa Romeo. And the sixth one was myself.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was our class. And of course, at that stage of your life, you don't know what's ahead of you, but you know you're hot because you've survived boot camp like no other boot camp in the world.
All six ended up in cars and/or bikes.
Yeah. Basically, what happens after 2 years is they tell you if you're good enough to become a car designer. Because if you're not, at that stage, after 2 years, you just become a product designer. You design that, you design your microphone, you design tables, which is not the most difficult thing in the world, and also probably not the most exciting thing in the world. But if you can become a car designer, everything else is a piece of cake. So.
But when you were racing bikes, did you have that love of design and drawing and wanting to work in car design? Did you just put that to one side?
No, you don't become a designer. That's what I firmly believe. You have to be born with this kind of thinking that makes me seem a little bit weird to most people, sorry, because I can't shut off. I basically am thinking all day long about something that doesn't exist, if you can understand that. A creative person basically doesn't learn to be creative. They have to be sort of wired differently, which I hate to say that, but it is wired differently in such a way that you're not really living on this planet,
So you look at shapes and colours
constantly
and just think, I hate that, I could do that, that should be like that.
Not that I hate it, but I just see that it can be better than it is. And that's what design is all about. If you can make something better than it is, then you're a designer, not an artist. Just to change something for change's sake, for me, makes absolutely no sense at all. That's like changing my shirt from a black shirt to a blue shirt or a white shirt. I would look at a shirt and say, how can you cut it differently to make it more practical, easier to make, cheaper to make, more interesting to look at, more innovative, more technology, whatever. But it's always, you don't shut off. That's why you're always looking at the latest technology that's coming out. I'm constantly on the internet trying to find out what is the latest technology for every single thing that could have an application later to whatever I'm designing.
But if your dad hadn't pulled you up on the bikes and let you carry on, who knows what would have happened? I mean, you could have ended up doing that for quite a bit longer.
I could have been not
You could have killed yourself, you could have...
No, I wouldn't say kill myself, but I'll tell you what, I probably would never have been as satisfied as I am today, because the problem with a designer or a creative person is it's an incredible outlet for your psyche, yourself, your spirit. I get, it's therapeutic for me to draw, it's therapeutic for me to think, it's therapeutic for me to construct something and see the result and fine tune it and never be happy. You're also, I have to mention that a good designer is never happy with his work. And the only way you can actually make him stop is say, okay, give me your pencil because we have to go into production. The time is stopped. We're finished with that design process. We actually have to build the darn thing now. And you're still thinking about, give me a couple more days, I want to refine this a little bit more. And whenever something comes out, I don't look, although I've done quite a few cars that have been successful, I don't look at them in a positive way. I look at them very critically, which is kind of sad because my whole life is trying to make it as good as I can, but I'm never happy. To tell you the truth, I'm never really happy with anything I've ever designed. I always think if I had another chance to go at it again, it would look completely different and hopefully better, but definitely a step above what I just did.
You work for Maserati, you work for Ferrari, you work for Alfa, you work for McLaren. Have you got a standout car? I know you're very self-critical, but have you got a car that you're 90% happy with, if that's the highest figure?
That is one of the difficult questions that have been asked to me in different ways, but I always fall back on, if you have children, it's like somebody asking you which of those 5 kids or 12 kids or whatever is your favorite. It's kind of hard to say them because they're all different. And I designed them for different companies that had different briefs, different reasons for that car to exist. And you can say that the best car is the one you haven't done yet, which is a lame excuse for getting out of the question. And you could say that it was the first one, or it can be the most expensive one. I've been lucky to do a range of designs that go from one extreme to the other. So I've done your everyday car that everybody purchases just to get from A to B, to the ones that are, you have to be senseless to buy this car. Absolutely no intelligence at all. You pay crazy money to buy something you don't need just because you have the hots for it and you desire to put it into your living room and just stare at it and not drive it. So that kind of extreme, I've got it under my belt. I have to say, probably if I had to pick one and the other cars weren't listening to me, it would probably be the one that people don't recognize so much. I mean, the Mini is way out there, people know about it. But for me, it's got to always be the Maserati MC12, simply because that car, it didn't exist before. It wasn't a new car replacing another car that existed in the past. We had 4 months to create the MC12. If everybody knows what the MC12 is, it's iconic in many senses, especially because from 2005 to 2009, it won every world championship. It won more races than any other car in that segment. And that car, its sole intent when I designed it was to win. It wasn't just to be another supercar, you know, more than £500,000 pounds, but it wasn't just designed to be in the next segment, in that segment. It was designed to win. So my task was to design a beautiful, winning car, supercar, and to compete in that series, the FIA GT series, which is 24-hour races or 12-hour races. You actually had to have 25 versions of that car homologated for road use. So I designed the race car first, made sure it was all as good as could be in sound of performance for winning the class, and then had to turn around and design the road version of that such that we could race with that race version. And it was so successful at that stage, even before it was even launched, that when we went to homologate it at the FIA in Paris, when they saw the car, they laughed and said, "You guys have really pulled one over our eyes, because instead of taking a road car and converting it to a race car, you've actually designed the race car and converted 25 of them into a road car. You've come through the back door and you're going to walk all over everybody. You have too much of an advantage."
And it slightly pushed the boundary on what constitutes a GT car too, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, up to that day, GT cars were cars you could recognize on the street that had been turned into a race car. This car looked like a race car with a registration plate on it. It was wild. That car still today, I get goosebumps even, you know, whenever I see one or hear one. What interestingly happened was the FIA said, "Okay, you guys cannot race next year with this car because it's too dedicated to being a winner, and we're going to restrict the length anyways next year of the cars, the overall length, to 5 meters. And your car is 5 meters 15, so you will not be able to compete next year." After we'd already built 25 of these things, found 25 buyers for them, and so we had to go back to the drawing table and do a short nose version of it, and again build another 25, and then sell those at 5 meters, 5 meters long. And we didn't tell the customer, so there might be a customer in here who has an MC12 who doesn't even know his car is actually not
that much shorter.
Yeah, he's got a short nose. So, but it's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, let me put you on the spot again. Any cars that you designed that really upset you? You're not happy with them, and you wish you could do it again?
Yeah, all of them. Again, all of them. But
you guys,
for the moment when I did it, it was the best I could do. So, like I said, if I had to go back and do them all over again, none of them look like they do now. The Mini was a very interesting one. Obviously, the first new Mini that we had to do with BMW when I was with BMW. That car probably had the most logical design ever that I could come up with, because, and that formula translated over to the Fiat 500 for exactly the same reasons I'm going to tell you right now. When we did the Mini was basically, we all know it's an English icon, and it meant everything to England because it put families on wheels again and finally got them up and down the country and everything. But that car, done by Alex Sigonis back in the mid-50s, late mid-50s, and when it came out in '59, was not very successful for a few years. It took a bit of help with John Cooper to turn it into the Mini Cooper, and then it became very successful, and then it became a classless car with pop stars buying it, singers buying it, poor people buying it. The funny thing is, they all gave the car a name, so that car became a very emotional product for people. Your Mini was named Sue or Betty or John or whatever. So there was a real emotional connection with that car, and it just kept getting better and better until a point where they finally figured out that, the company started collapsing, Rover Group, and everything was starting to go downhill, British Leyland, obviously. So when BMW bought the Rover Group, they got into their portfolio, they got a lot of brands, Rover MG, Land Rover, Wolseley, if anybody ever remembers that one, Mini.
The Hornet.
Yeah, there you go. And so the idea there that BMW started thinking was, do we carry Mini into the future, or do we just let it dissolve? Because in '99, this was already thinking back in '95, in '99 the Mini won't be allowed on the road because of legislation. So do we make it our third pillar? We have Rolls-Royce as our luxury brand, we have BMW as our meat brand, volume brand, and we can have Mini as our luxury small car brand, small BMW. So they decided on doing that, but then they started getting very nervous because they thought, we're a German company trying to reinterpret an English icon. If we get it wrong with the look of this car, what it means, everybody's going to, be a little bit upset with us. So we have to absolutely nail the look of the new Mini. So in '95, they had the competition where typically if you have the design for a new car, you'll get 2-3 designers working on that, and each one will do a design. And one of those 3 full-size clay models will get chosen to become the new model for this company. Huge companies like GM or Toyota, they'll maybe do 5 models. It's a huge budget to do 5 cars, make sure that they're feasible, and you can choose any one of those 5 for production. But BMW, in their worry that they might not nail it, the design, decided to open up the competition worldwide to 15 designers, to have 15 models. Never before, never again. It was an amazingly huge budget, but they wanted to make sure they shot with a shotgun and something was going to land on the bullseye. So we had, I was working out of Munich with 4 other designers. We had 4 designers in England working on it. We had US designers, Italian designers working on it. After 6 months, we all got to show our design in this very famous final shoot down at the OK Corral in Gaydon, the Motor Heritage Center. And all of them were lined up there, and you could see 15 different ideas of what the 21st century Mini could look like. And we had everything from where one designer had fallen asleep for 5 months and had the car just scaled up. So it was a scaled up Mini, which was lazy. And the other guy was smoking something that we don't know what he was smoking, but it sure wasn't a Mini. And somewhere in the middle was mine. And we weren't allowed in those 6 months of clay development to speak to each other because they didn't want any of the ideas from one designer to flow over to the other designer. So basically we had to stay very independent, keep our ideas to ourselves. You had 1 month to design the car, and 5 months to have a team of modelers build it for you. That was each designer's task.
And all this was kept out of the press?
Completely out of the press,
amazing.
Because we couldn't tell the people that Germany was designing the new Mini or that BMW was involved in it. So it was basically, people were still buying Minis off, from the dealerships and everything, the current Minis. But when I look back, and later I was able to talk with the other 14 designers to ask them how they came up with their idea for the 21st century Mini, nobody did what I did, which for me was a shock because I thought that's the only way you can redesign the new Mini. The new Mini had stayed the same from 1959 to 1999. It was the same, basically the same looking car. They changed the wheels, they changed the upholstery, but a Mini was a Mini was a Mini. So I thought, I've got 4 weeks to design this thing, the 21st century one. If the car had changed in 1969, what would it have looked like? So I spent the first week drawing the 1969 Mini, and the second week I designed the 79 Mini, the third week the 89, and then the last week of that month I designed the 99 Mini. So what I did was I created sort of a genetic DNA link up from your great-grandfather to what you look like today. So
what were you inspired by for each decade?
The rules and regulations
of the time.
Yeah, the culture of the people. I'll tell you, the ugliest car design of that Mini was the 79 Mini, when everybody was more concerned about safety and being protected inside the car and having volume around there. I would never have bought the 79 Mini. It was pretty boxy and horrible looking. But from that, they learned that the car wasn't really that attractive, that emotional, so the 89 Mini started to head back to something that's a little bit more sporty looking, a bit more the original character and the emotion of the original one. They all looked like Minis, just a prettier Mini became the evolvement of the 70 ugly Mini, I guess. And then I even did one in that stage, just out for the heck of it, of what the 2009 Mini would look like. This was back in 2005. So after having designed the 99 Mini and getting ready to build it, I was thinking, what's it going to look like 10 years from then? And that car looks nothing like the Mini that's out there today. I really, it hurts me to see the Mini today. I know there are a lot of Mini lovers out there, and I kind of appreciate that they've kept the same theme that I came up with that brought the emotion of the original with the technology of the future into it. But at the same time, I think they could have jumped a little bit further into the future with a bit more innovation than what they currently have.
Okay, one final question. A car that you wish had your name on it. A car that you look at and go, I wish I'd drawn that.
Yeah, I could say that too. I could have told you that as you were speaking. For me, the most impressive car in the world was never designed by a car designer. It for me is the state of art of all kinds of design, not just for car design, because it was designed for a purpose, and it nailed it. I mean, the purpose of that car was to be, it turned out to be the sexiest car in history for me, and I don't think anything will ever beat it. It's like there are a lot of beautiful women out there, of course, but if you pick one beautiful woman, that Marilyn Monroe, for example, she's timelessly beauty. For me, it's definitely the E-Type Jaguar, and it has to be the Series 1 Jaguar E-Type fixed head, because that for me is the optimal look of performance, of sensuality, of desirability, of timelessness design. The proportions of that car are just simply incredible. You go any further than that and it becomes a cartoon. You go any backwards on that design and it starts to turn into a mundane, simple looking wannabe supercar or sports car. I think the guy who designed it was an aerodynamicist, Malcolm Sayers, and
he'd done the C-Type and D-Type race cars.
Yeah, those cars were absolutely the C-Type, and probably, you know, for me the Jaguars of that era were just absolutely spot on. They were on point, as I say, and that for me is tough to get. But I think if we can return back to that era of making cars, not like looking like 50s cars, but that emotion that when you see the car for the first time, you have to have it, you want it. It's love at first sight. And we've lost that. Regrettably, we've lost that thing now where you have to get used to the look of a car. You know, give me 6 months and I'll get used to the look of it, and then I'm going to start liking it. Poor women out there that have to wait for a man to say, I might get used to you after 6 months and I might marry you, but for the first 6 months I just need to get used to that look you have, you know? It doesn't happen. You either fall in love with somebody almost immediately and you have a great feeling about it. You wait 6 months, that's not a good design, you know? And that really tees me off a little bit about car design these days, is that people are stretching so far to try to make a difference that they've lost all sense of what beauty is all about. It's almost like ugly is the new beautiful. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
You were saying, I won't name any names, but a particular car that does 1 million miles an hour, has 1,000 horsepower, costs £1 million, they're only going to make a few, but it's ugly. And there's no excuse, is there, you said, for bad aesthetics?
No, there's absolutely zero excuse for bad aesthetics. We won't name names, obviously, because there are a lot of these types of cars out there, but performance is beautiful. You look at SR-71 Blackbird airplane, done way back in the 60s, actually designed in the 50s. Anything that performs at its absolute peak looks beautiful. It's almost as if, you know, you can make something perform. You know, you take a warthog, one of the most ugly animals. It is so fast. But do you desire a warthog? No. If I had a choice between a warthog and a cheetah, cheetah's much faster, obviously I'd go for a cheetah. But you can make ugly fast. It's just that there's no reason for ugly cars. Ugly cars are not items, and you have to desire a product like that. Nobody needs that kind of car. So why not make it beautiful at the same time, you know? There's got to be a physical, cars are emotional products. They're not industrial machines, they're emotional purchases. Nobody needs to buy one for a job or anything like that. So I'm sorry if I sound very intensely emotional here, because I really feel that cars are getting uglier as the decades come along, and there's no sense in that. A lot of it goes to the way they're being designed today, which is like computers. And I'm not against technology and innovation and pushing forward with digital technology, but you cannot beat the hand of man on a product. You know, it has to be done by hand.
Is there a design by committee philosophy now too? One man doesn't have sole responsibility for the whole thing anymore? A bit like in Formula One.
Regretfully, yes, because you'll keep getting the finance guy coming in and giving the group his opinion on the design of the car. And I don't go into the finance meetings and tell the people that I don't like their budget. It doesn't look pretty. Can we change it? So why should a finance man come to me and tell me he doesn't like the look of my car? Why don't I change that? I really hate that. I was trained to design a beautiful car. I've done it, and for somebody to tell me his opinion, I'll respect it, but if he doesn't have the basic knowledge of what good design is all about, because there's good design and bad design. Good design is obvious. Then there's bad taste and good taste. And bad taste, I'm sorry, but I'm going to fight against that. Everything I do is, I don't want bad taste in people influencing what I have to produce. So, and regretfully, that's creeping into the industry a lot more than it ever was before. That's why we're losing that artistic feeling of the 60s and the 50s, when you had people designing gorgeous sculptures of cars. Legislation obviously has to do with it, but when somebody blames legislation for an ugly car, lame excuse. When they decide that, or say that performance is the excuse why a car looks ugly, lame excuse. There's no reason for an ugly product.
A lot of it is subjective though, isn't it?
No.
If we we don't all like the same thing.
No, but that's bad taste and good taste. There's good design. Good design is a technical formula. We all know the golden rule, golden law of proportions. There is in nature so much beauty. Why is it that way? Because it adheres to a formula. I sound like a religious guy here. 1.618 is the formula for all good design. If designers use that formula, you get the beauty of nature in your products. I've done that consistently throughout my career, and no car I've ever designed, I think, has ever been criticized for being not attractive. Quite the opposite. But because I adhere to those principles of what we call Da Vinci or intelligent design, and you get good proportion. Subjectiveness, yeah, but I'm sorry, the people who like ugly things, that's because they have bad taste, for me, or are lazy and don't want to come up with the right look for the product.
Have you written a book?
It's in progress at the moment.
Is it?
Yeah.
A very sort of cerebral car design manual.
Well, what's more impressive than a book for me is a film, and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but a film is being produced. I'm in the stages right now of filming, and we're filming my life, my design life, which will cover a lot of my design philosophy, how I got to where I'm at, basically, and what's coming next. Because for me, next is a lot more important than where I've been, and I get to talk about things that sort of have been hidden in the industry, sort of the secrets that people like to hear about. Not air dirty laundry, because there is no dirty laundry to air, but it's about the interesting things that companies require you to keep quiet about while you're with them. And also, of course, the book will be launched pretty much around the same time as the film coming out.
Brilliant. I can't wait for that. I wish we had more time, but
That's all right.
we're going to get drowned out by all that in a minute.
That's fine.
Frank, thank you so much. Fascinating.